Ethan Cole was a man everyone in the city knew. At only 35 years old, he had built one of the biggest technology companies in the country. His picture often appeared in magazines, and people described him as young, smart, and very successful. But that morning, success was the last thing on his mind. He was running late. The investors from overseas were already in the conference room, waiting to hear about the company's future plans. Ethan hated being late. It made him feel unprepared, and that was one thing he never allowed himself to be. He walked quickly through the wide marble-floored lobby of the company's headquarters, his leather shoes clicking sharply with each step. He glanced at his watch just 10 minutes before the meeting. His assistant had told him everything was ready, but he still wanted a few moments to collect his thoughts. The presentation in his hand had details of a multi-million-dollar expansion, something that could change the company's future forever. As he turned a corner, he felt the pressure in his stomach reminding him that he had skipped breakfast and too much coffee was never kind. "Just a minute," he murmured to himself. He spotted a door with a sign above it and, without looking carefully, pushed it open. The moment the door shut behind him, he realized something was different. The room smelled faintly of roses, and the walls were painted a soft pink color. A row of sinks lined the far wall, each with a small vase of flowers beside it. The air felt calm and warm, not at all like the cold, sharp style of the men's restroom he was used to. Ethan froze. His heart gave a sudden jump. This was the women's restroom. Before he could even turn around to leave, a quiet sound of footsteps echoed. A woman in a gray uniform was standing near the sinks, holding a cleaning cloth in her hand. She looked surprised, but not angry. Her eyes, dark and tired, studied him for a second. Then she said, in a soft voice, "Sir, this is the ladies' restroom." Ethan's face burned with embarrassment. Oh no, I'm so sorry," he stammered. "I wasn't paying attention." He stepped back toward the door, wanting to escape the awkward situation. But something made him pause. The woman, whose name tag read Maria, was wiping the counters slowly. Her hands shook slightly, and her eyes looked as if they carried a weight far heavier than her cleaning supplies. Ethan had seen hundreds of employees in this building, most faces he never remembered, but for some reason, he couldn't take his eyes off this quiet janitor. There was a moment of stillness. Ethan felt strangely out of place, not because of the room he had entered, but because of how unfamiliar it was for him to notice someone like Maria. His world was usually full of boardrooms, emails, and numbers, not the silent stories of the people who cleaned his company's floors. He gave a small, apologetic smile. "Really, I'm sorry for this," he said again. "I'll get out of your way." Maria nodded, but she didn't say anything more. Her silence made him curious. Who was she? Why did her hands tremble like that? Just then, a faint sound broke the quietness of the restroom. It was soft at first, almost like a whisper, but then it became clearer, a quiet sob. Ethan turned his head. The sound was coming from one of the closed stalls. He hesitated. His business mind told him to leave immediately. This wasn't his place, he had no reason to stay. But something in that sound, a young woman crying softly, held him in place. Maria glanced toward the stall and whispered, "She's been in there for some time." Her voice carried both concern and helplessness, as if she wanted to help but didn't know how. Ethan looked at the door once more. The meeting was still waiting for him. The investors were probably checking their watches by now. But for the first time in many years, his schedule didn't seem like the most important thing. A part of him wanted to turn around, leave, and pretend this never happened. Another part of him, the one that rarely spoke these days, wanted to know why someone in his company was crying in a restroom on a busy Monday morning. He stood there, torn between the world he knew and the moment he had accidentally stepped into. And for reasons he could not explain, he chose not to leave, at least, not yet. Ethan stayed still for a moment, unsure of what to do next. The soft sobs from the closed stall filled the room, making the silence around him feel even heavier. He glanced at Maria, the janitor, who was now standing quietly with her cleaning cloth pressed against her fingers. Her face showed a mix of worry and patience, the kind of look people carry when they have seen too many hidden struggles. "Should we check if she's okay?" Ethan whispered, his voice low, almost uncertain. He was the CEO of this building, the man who gave speeches to hundreds of people without hesitation, yet now, in this small restroom, he felt like he didn't know the right thing to say. Maria looked at him for a moment. "Sometimes," she said softly, "people just need a moment alone." "But she's been in there for a long time." Ethan nodded. He took a step closer to the stall, still leaving a respectful distance. "Excuse me," he said gently, "are you all right in there?" There was a pause, followed by a small sniffle. Then a weak voice answered, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to disturb anyone." Ethan's tone softened even more. "You're not disturbing us. We're just worried about you." Slowly, the door opened. A young woman stepped out, her eyes red and puffy from crying. She looked no older than 23 or 24, wearing a company ID badge around her neck. Her hands gripped a piece of tissue tightly, and she seemed embarrassed to even look at them. Maria was the first to speak. "Clara," she said gently, "you've been here since morning, haven't you?" The young woman Clara nodded slightly, her head lowered. I didn't know where else to go," she whispered. Ethan studied her face, trying to recall if he had ever seen her before. He might have passed her in the hallways once or twice, but she was one of the many employees whose names never reached his ears. In that moment, he realized how large his company had become, so large that people working under his roof could be struggling and he would never know. "What happened?" Ethan asked softly, careful not to sound demanding. Clara took a deep breath, her voice shaking as she spoke. "My mother is sick, she's been in the hospital for weeks. I've been trying to take care of her, but it means I've missed work. Deadlines, meetings, my manager says I'm not performing well. I'm afraid I'll lose my job soon." I tried to explain, but I don't think anyone really listened. Her words hung in the air like a heavy curtain. Maria placed a hand gently on Clara's shoulder, her eyes full of understanding. Ethan felt something shift inside him. He had always believed in efficiency, in results. Numbers and charts were what he focused on, not personal lives. But here was an employee crying in a restroom because life had given her too much to carry at once. He cleared his throat, trying to find the right words. "I didn't know. I'm sorry you're going through this," he said honestly. Clara gave a faint smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "It's not your fault," she replied. "You're the CEO. You have so much to handle. People like me, we just hope to keep our jobs." Those words hit him harder than he expected. People like me. It wasn't anger in her tone, just quiet acceptance, as if she had already decided her struggles didn't matter to anyone important. Maria spoke again, her voice steady. "Sometimes, Mr. Cole, people only need someone to listen. Even a small bit of kindness can make a difference." Ethan nodded slowly. He had walked into this room by mistake, but now it felt like something more. Maybe it was chance, or maybe life had decided he needed to see what he had been missing all these years. The meeting was still waiting. Investors were still seated upstairs, sipping their coffee and checking their watches. But for once, Ethan didn't feel the same urgency. He looked at Clara, then at Maria, and said, "Take your time. Don't rush back until you feel ready." Clara wiped her face with the tissue, trying to compose herself. "Thank you," she whispered. As Ethan stepped toward the door, he glanced back at Maria again. There was a quiet strength about her, a woman who worked silently in the background, yet noticed pain in others before anyone else did. Her presence, calm and steady, made the moment feel even more real. Outside the restroom, the busy world of the office continued without pause, keyboards clicking, phones ringing, deals being made. But for Ethan, something had already changed. A simple mistake had opened a door he never planned to enter, and now it seemed impossible to close it without doing something more. The rest of the day felt unusually slow for Ethan Cole. After leaving the women's restroom, he had hurried to the investors' meeting, but his mind was far from the numbers and charts in front of him. The presentation went smoothly on the surface. He spoke with confidence, the investors nodded, and his assistant handed out neatly printed reports. Yet behind his composed expression, his thoughts kept returning to the restroom. Clara's tear-stained face, her trembling hands holding that tissue, and Maria's calm, observant eyes stayed with him. They didn't belong in the same world as the shiny glass walls and expensive suits that surrounded him every day, and yet they were part of his company, his responsibility. As the meeting ended, one of the investors complimented him on his vision for expansion. "You always think about the future," the man said with a smile. Ethan forced a polite nod. The future, he thought. What about the people struggling today? When the last handshake was done and the room emptied, Ethan stayed seated for a moment, staring at the city skyline through the floor-to-ceiling window. The streets below were full of people, each carrying their own stories, some of success, some of struggle. For years, he had told himself that running a company meant focusing on growth, profit, and efficiency. But now he wondered, had he lost sight of the human side? Later in the afternoon, Ethan walked down the same corridor where his mistake had happened that morning. It was quieter now. The janitorial cart stood near the corner, and he saw Maria arranging her cleaning tools. She looked up and gave a small nod. "Maria," he said gently, "about this morning, how long has Clara been working here?" "Almost a year," Maria replied, folding a clean towel. "She's a good worker. Always polite. But life hasn't been easy for her." Ethan hesitated, then asked, "Do many of our employees go through things like that? Struggles that no one talks about?" Maria paused, her eyes thoughtful. "Mr. Cole, people carry their problems quietly. Not everyone shows what they are going through. Sometimes, they smile and keep working, but inside, they are fighting battles." Her words lingered in his mind as he walked back to his office. Battles no one sees. He wondered how many faces in his company carried hidden tears, how many hearts worked silently while feeling unseen. That evening, as the office lights dimmed and most employees left, Ethan sat alone at his desk. The large office felt colder than usual. Papers were scattered in neat piles, emails still blinking on his screen, but his attention was elsewhere. He thought about Clara again. He remembered how she said, "People like me just hope to keep our jobs." There was no anger in her voice, only quiet surrender. That hurt more than any complaint or demand would have. For the first time in years, he found himself questioning his own role. Was I so focused on building a company that I forgot about the people inside it? The next morning, Ethan arrived earlier than usual. The sun was still rising, casting golden light on the glass building. He walked through the lobby and noticed the early staff coming in: receptionists, cleaners, junior employees rushing to their desks. They all greeted him politely, their smiles brief, their steps quick. As he stood there, he realized something: he rarely stopped to know their names, their stories, or their struggles. They were the people who kept his company running, yet he was a stranger to them. His phone buzzed with a reminder of another meeting, but he dismissed it. There was something else he needed to do first. He asked his assistant to call Clara to his office. "Tell her it's nothing serious," he said. "I just want to talk." When Clara arrived, her expression was cautious. She probably thought this meeting was about her missed deadlines or poor attendance. She sat down nervously, clutching her bag. Ethan gave her a reassuring smile. "Clara," he began, "I want you to know that I didn't forget what happened yesterday. I heard what you said about your mother and your work situation." Clara lowered her gaze, embarrassed. "I didn't mean to make a scene," she murmured. I didn't know where else to cry." Ethan shook his head softly. "You didn't do anything wrong. You were overwhelmed. It happens to everyone, even people like me." For a moment, Clara looked surprised. She had probably imagined her CEO as someone far removed from her struggles, a figure who only cared about contracts and deadlines. "I'm not promising miracles," Ethan continued, "but I don't want to lose good employees because they are trying to take care of their families. We'll figure something out." Tears welled in Clara's eyes again, but this time, they were mixed with relief. She nodded silently, unable to find the right words. As she left the office, Ethan leaned back in his chair. That wrong turn into the women's restroom was no longer just a mistake. It was a door, one that had opened his eyes to a part of his company he had ignored for far too long. The next few days passed, but Ethan Cole's mind didn't return to its usual rhythm. Meetings, phone calls, and reports all moved around him as they always did, but his focus had shifted. The memory of Clara crying quietly in that restroom felt like a whisper he could not ignore. It wasn't just about one young woman's problem, it was about something much bigger, something hidden in the hallways of his company. One morning, as he stepped out of the elevator, Ethan saw Maria again. She was carrying a bucket and mop, her gray uniform a little worn at the edges. She paused politely as he passed. For a moment, Ethan stopped, something he rarely did. "Maria," he said, his voice softer than before, "how long have you been working here?" Maria looked a little surprised. "Almost 8 years, sir." "And do you like it here?" he asked. She gave a small smile, the kind that hides more than it shows. "It is work, Mr. Cole. It helps me take care of my family. But there are days it is not easy." Ethan tilted his head. "Not easy? Why?" Maria hesitated for a moment, then said gently, "Sir, many of us, cleaners, junior staff, helpers, we work long hours. Sometimes our families need us too. Sometimes we want to speak, but we think nobody will listen." Her words were calm, without complaint or bitterness, but they carried truth. Ethan felt it. How many times had he walked past people like Maria without even a glance? How many lives ran quietly in the background while he focused on growth charts? Later that day, he sat in his office looking at the company's policies. They were strict, efficient, and designed to push results, but they had no room for real life. There were no clear programs for employees dealing with family illnesses, personal emergencies, or emotional struggles. The company was running smoothly on paper, but behind that paper, there were cracks. That evening, Clara came to his office with an update. Her mother's condition was slowly improving, but hospital bills were still piling up. She was trying to keep up with her tasks, but the stress showed in her tired eyes. "You don't have to explain again," Ethan said, waving gently for her to sit down. "I wanted to ask, have you spoken to anyone in HR about your situation?" Clara gave a small, sad laugh. "I did, but they said rules are rules. Attendance is strict. Deadlines are fixed." Ethan felt a small sting of shame. Those rules came from him. The system reflected his own priorities, efficiency over empathy. "You know," he said quietly, "when I started this company, I wanted it to be a place where talent could grow. But somewhere along the way, I stopped looking at the people behind the work." Clara looked at him, unsure how to respond. "Sir, you've built something great. People respect you. But sometimes, even strong people need someone to understand them." Her words echoed Maria's from the day before. Ethan realized something: kindness didn't make a company weak, it made it human. The next morning, Ethan called a meeting not with the investors, not with the managers, but with a small group of staff from different levels, cleaners, assistants, junior employees, and a few from HR. They all looked confused when they entered the conference room. It was rare for the CEO to invite them directly. "I want to hear from you," Ethan said simply. "What makes your work hard? What stops you from doing your best? And what can we do to change that?" At first, no one spoke. They glanced at one another, unsure if this was a test. Then Maria, who had been quietly mopping the floor earlier, raised her hand slightly. "Sometimes, sir, we just need flexibility. A sick child, an emergency at home, not everyone has someone else to take care of things." Another employee added, "It's hard to ask for leave without fear of losing our job." And slowly, one by one, they began to speak. Their words were soft but real stories of parents in hospitals, children waiting at home, stress that came not from the work itself, but from the fear of being unheard. Ethan listened. For once, he didn't interrupt with quick solutions or business terms. He simply listened. By the end of the hour, the room felt lighter, as if a door had opened that had been shut for years. That night, as the city lights flickered outside his window, Ethan thought of his own journey. He had started with nothing but ambition, and he had climbed fast, but somewhere on that climb, he had stopped looking down, not to see people as less than him, but to see the lives that supported his success. He picked up his phone and sent a short email to his board: "Tomorrow, we start something new. It's time to care as much about our people as we do about our profits." The next morning began quietly for Ethan Cole. The city was just waking up, the streets still wet from a light rain during the night. He reached his office earlier than usual and stood by the wide glass window, looking at the sunrise painting the buildings gold. For years, this view had been a symbol of success for him: high towers, busy roads, endless movement. But today, it made him think of the people inside those towers. How many of them started their day with fear instead of hope? How many carried worries they could not share? His mind returned to the conversation he had the day before with the staff. Their voices, humble yet honest, kept echoing in his thoughts. Maria's calm words about flexibility. The assistant's quiet admission about fear. Clara's tears, still fresh in his memory. All these pieces connected into something he had ignored for too long: people did not only work for a paycheck, they worked to live, to care for families, to survive their own private storms. Ethan had always considered himself a fair leader. He paid well, offered bonuses, and rewarded hard work. But he had never looked beyond the results. The policies he had signed with a pen felt fair on paper, but, in real life, they often left no room for being human. He walked slowly to his desk, his footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. On his desk lay several files, each one full of plans for company growth, new branches, and bigger profits. Normally, this would have excited him. Today, it only felt incomplete. Picking up a pen, Ethan began to write on a blank notepad. He didn't write numbers this time. He wrote questions. What do my employees really need? How can we keep growing without losing their trust? Can kindness and success live together? Each question felt like a mirror, showing him how distant he had become from the people who built the foundation of his empire. Later that morning, Clara knocked gently on his door. Her steps were unsure, but there was a small trace of hope in her eyes this time. "You wanted to see me, sir?" she asked. "Yes, Clara," Ethan said with a warm smile. "How is your mother today?" Clara blinked, surprised that he remembered. "She's stable now. The doctors are hopeful, but I still need to visit her often." "That's important," Ethan said. "Family should never come second to work. I've been thinking about this a lot. You shouldn't have to choose between doing your job and caring for someone you love." Her eyes widened slightly. But the company, the rules will change, Ethan interrupted gently. Not just for you, but for anyone who needs understanding during hard times. Clara didn't speak for a moment. She simply nodded, her lips pressing together as if to hold back another wave of tears, this time, not from sadness, but from relief. After she left, Ethan called in his senior managers. Many of them were surprised by his sudden shift in priorities. Some even looked nervous when he spoke about introducing new policies, flexible schedules, emergency leave, emotional support programs. This is not a charity, Ethan explained firmly but calmly. This is an investment in people. If our employees feel safe and supported, they will give their best, not out of fear, but out of loyalty and respect. One of the managers, an older man who had been with him since the early days, nodded thoughtfully. I think this is the change we didn't know we needed, Ethan. Throughout the week, Ethan kept reflecting on his own journey. There had been a time when he, too, was just another young man trying to build a future. He remembered his first office job, long hours, low pay, and a boss who never once asked about his well-being. He had promised himself that one day, if he ever became successful, he would create something better. Somehow, he had forgotten that promise along the way. That weekend, Ethan drove to a quiet park outside the city. He sat on a bench, watching children play and families enjoy their morning together. He thought about the people in his company: Maria, who had worked for 8 years without much recognition; Clara, who was fighting for her mother's health while trying to keep her job, and many others whose names he didn't even know yet. He realized that real leadership was not only about leading meetings or signing big contracts. It was about carrying the weight of other people's hopes and making sure the path was wide enough for them to walk beside him, not behind him. As the sun dipped lower, Ethan made a decision. He would not let this be just a moment of guilt. It would be a turning point. The wrong door he had opened had shown him a truth more valuable than any deal: success without compassion was an empty victory. He stood up, feeling a rare sense of calm. For the first time in years, the CEO was not thinking only about profits. He was thinking about people. Monday morning arrived with a soft drizzle outside. The glass building of Cole Enterprises reflected the gray sky, but inside, something new was quietly beginning to grow. Ethan Cole entered the office with a different kind of focus in his eyes. For years, he had walked these halls with thoughts full of numbers and deadlines. Today, his mind carried something else: faces, stories, and a promise he had made to himself. He started the day by calling his human resources team into the boardroom. The room was filled with cautious curiosity. HR meetings usually meant performance reviews or policy reminders, but this time, Ethan stood at the head of the table with no charts or contracts in hand. "Good morning, everyone," he began, his voice steady yet warm. "I want to talk about something we don't talk about enough: our people." The team exchanged brief glances. Ethan continued, "Last week, I came across a situation that made me realize how blind I've been. We have employees who give their time and energy to this company, yet when life throws them challenges, illness, family emergencies, personal struggles, our system doesn't always support them. That has to change." He placed a folder on the table. Inside were drafts of new policies: flexible working hours for those with medical or family emergencies, a confidential counseling program, and a special assistance fund for employees in serious need. One HR manager spoke hesitantly, "Sir, these changes, they're generous. But won't it affect our productivity?" Ethan looked at her calmly. "Productivity is not only about hours worked. It's about people feeling safe and valued. A loyal team works harder than a fearful one. I want this company to be known not just for success, but for humanity." The team nodded slowly. Some smiled, relieved, perhaps, to see a side of leadership that cared about more than the bottom line. After the meeting, Ethan asked his assistant to arrange a private conversation with Maria, the janitor who had unknowingly been part of his turning point. When she entered his office, her hands were folded nervously. "You don't need to be nervous, Maria," Ethan said kindly. "I wanted to thank you. The day I walked into the wrong restroom, you handled the situation with respect. More than that, you noticed someone else's pain before I did. That matters." Maria shook her head slightly. "Sir, I only did what anyone should do." Ethan smiled. "Not everyone does. That's why I want to offer you something. We're starting a new employee support committee. It will make sure staff like Clara and many others can get help when they need it. I think you'd be perfect to help lead it." Maria's eyes widened. "Me? But I'm just a janitor." "You are someone who sees people when others don't," Ethan replied. "That is leadership too." She didn't answer right away. Her hands gripped the edge of the chair. Slowly, a smile appeared, shy, but full of meaning. "If I can help someone feel less alone, then yes, I will do it." The following week, the new policies were announced. Employees gathered in the lobby as Ethan stood before them. It wasn't a grand speech with bright lights or banners, just honest words in a calm voice. "I built this company to be strong," he said, "but strength is not only measured in profit. It is measured in how we treat one another when times are hard. Starting today, no one here will have to choose between their job and their family, their health, or their dignity." The crowd was quiet for a moment. Then, one by one, people began to clap, soft at first, then stronger. Clara stood in the back, her hands clasped, her eyes shining with something she hadn't felt in months: relief. For Ethan, that moment felt more valuable than any contract he had signed. The applause was not for his wealth or his position, it was for his willingness to listen. Later that day, he walked through the office, noticing how people looked at him differently now. Not with fear or forced respect, but with something warmer: trust. A few employees stopped him to share their thanks. One young man mentioned his father's illness, another said she finally felt brave enough to request flexible hours for her studies. Each story was small, but together, they were the beginning of a change he could see. That evening, Ethan stayed late, as he often did. But this time, the office didn't feel cold. He opened his laptop and saw an email from Clara: "Thank you for giving me hope when I was about to give up." He read it twice, then leaned back in his chair. It was a simple sentence, yet it carried more weight than any deal in his career. The rain outside had stopped, leaving the city streets shining under the streetlights. Ethan looked out the window and thought of how a single wrong turn, a simple mistake, had led to something this right. Months passed, and the building that once echoed only with hurried footsteps and polite greetings began to carry a different kind of sound: laughter in the hallways, friendly conversations near the elevators, and a sense of calm that wasn't there before. The changes Ethan Cole had introduced were no longer just policies on paper, they were becoming a living part of the company's culture. Maria, the janitor who had once worked silently in the background, now walked the hallways with new confidence. As the leader of the Employee Support Committee, she met staff members from every floor, listened to their problems, and connected them with help when they needed it. Her gray uniform was the same, but people now greeted her with respect rather than passing glances. Clara's life, too, had taken a turn. With flexible working hours, she was able to be with her mother during treatment while keeping her job secure. Her performance improved, and so did her smile. One afternoon, she visited Ethan's office not with fear or worry, but to share good news. "My mother is getting better," she said with a bright face. "She might come home next week." "That's wonderful, Clara," Ethan replied. "You handled everything with strength. We're lucky to have you here." Clara shook her head gently. "No, sir. I'm lucky to work in a place where people matter." Her words stayed with Ethan long after she left. They reminded him why this change mattered: not for praise, not for headlines, but for quiet victories like this. The company began to notice other positive effects too. Employees who once hid their struggles started speaking openly. Managers learned to be more understanding. Productivity did not fall as some had feared, in fact, it slowly rose. People who felt cared for worked with a sense of loyalty and energy that no strict deadline could ever force. Ethan often walked through the floors unannounced, stopping to ask names, listening to stories, and sometimes just sharing a moment of small talk. At first, employees were surprised. The CEO who once moved like a shadow behind tinted office doors was now someone they could meet by the coffee machine. It felt strange, but in a good way. One Friday afternoon, the company held a small event in the lobby. It wasn't grand, just a few decorations, light music, and everyone gathered for a simple reason: to appreciate each other. Maria stood beside Ethan as he gave a short speech. "When I started this company," Ethan said, "I thought success was about numbers, contracts, and towers that touched the sky. But now I know success is also about people who walk through these doors every day. Your hard work builds this company, but your lives give it meaning." There was applause, but more than that, there were smiles, real, warm smiles that reached the eyes. After the event, Ethan stood by the window on the upper floor, watching employees leave for the weekend. Some waved at him, some just walked out with a lighter step. Maria joined him, carrying her clipboard. "You've changed a lot, sir," she said with a small grin. "Or maybe I just started seeing clearly," Ethan replied. She nodded. "Sometimes life opens a door we didn't mean to open." He laughed quietly. "Yes. And sometimes, that wrong door leads to the right place." In the months that followed, Cole Enterprises gained a new reputation, not just as a successful company, but as one that valued its people. Job seekers wanted to join not only for the salary, but because they heard of the culture inside. Even competitors began to notice and asked about the changes. For Ethan, the greatest reward wasn't the rising profits or the new partnerships that came with this image. It was the letters he received, thank you notes from employees, holiday cards from families, small words of gratitude that filled a drawer in his office. One evening, long after most employees had left, Ethan opened that drawer and read one of the letters again. It was from Clara, written a few weeks after her mother came home. "Sometimes, help doesn't arrive with loud promises. Sometimes it arrives quietly, like a door you didn't expect to open. Thank you for opening that door." He folded the letter carefully and looked around the empty office. The lights outside flickered, cars moved like small rivers of light, and the city continued its endless rush. But inside, there was a peace he hadn't known before. Ethan Cole was still a millionaire CEO. He still had deals to make, challenges to face, and plans to achieve. But now, he also had something more: connection, empathy, and a company where success had a heart. That wrong turn, that accidental step into a place he didn't belong, had taught him the most important lesson of his career: true leadership begins not with power, but with listening.